your introduction about yourself.
Well, I'm Jean Lim Yee, and my husband was Mr. John Moon Yee from Salinas, and I've been a widow for about 7 years. So this is a picture of my family, of the family I come from. And Lim Hong was my grandfather, and a lot of people that came over worked at the railroads. And but here's his whole family. Shall I read off names? The tallest one is the youngest one, and he was Wa Lim, and the man standing next to him was my father, Fujuk, Lam Fujuk, and it was my father. And then this is Lim Singh was the oldest son, and he lived in San Francisco. My father, we lived in Berkeley. There are two sisters. One woman was Mrs. Wang Yao, and one woman was Mrs. Lei. I've forgotten her middle name. And this is, let's see, I'm not sure who these two people are. These two.
That's your grandmother and your youngest uncle.
Oh, well, this is my youngest. This is my youngest.
No.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The youngest uncle is a boy,
Oh,
between his parents.
Okay.
So, could you tell us something about your father was the second son of Lim Hong?
Yeah. My father was had been a rancher, and then he a Shell Oil Company serviced his ranch, and when they liked him very much, and one of the superiors there asked if he'd come and work for them, and so my dad did, and that brought him back into town to live with the family instead of being out at the ranch, but he had to travel quite a bit, and so that's
So, and how about your mother?
my mother was was from San Francisco, and she had there were 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and their father had been a teacher for Chinese, and so the family lived in San Francisco.
You came from a pioneer
Yes,
family.
yes.
And what year were you born?
1917. May 8th, 1917. I'm an old lady.
And did you grow up speaking Chinese or English?
Both. But now, I mean, I haven't spoken Chinese for years. We went to Chinese school in Berkeley. They had a Chinese school, and it's just been kind of lost.
Well, did you know your grandfather, Lim?
Yeah, oh yes. And he used to come over and stay with us because my grandmother got too crabby. So they lived down in South San Francisco, and he'd take the Potrero Hill in San Francisco, and he'd take the streetcar up and then transfer it and take the ferry over to Oakland, and then take the train up to Berkeley, and come and stay with us until things cooled down and go home. But that was repeated many, many times.
So you did know
your
grandfather, who was the railroad worker on
Yeah.
the Central Pacific.
Yeah.
Could you describe him, please?
Huh? Well, he's tall and just a worker.
Did he ever talk about his experiences? Did he ever tell you anything about what he did?
It was what they were doing was very, very well known, you know, because the railroad was coming and was connecting the country. So that was.
So your grandfather came and actually stayed with you because of
Oh,
his
yeah.
wife.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
But
but he was a lot older than his wife.
well, it wasn't that way. Because the men came over first, you know, going to a new country and trying to get work and getting established before they'd have a wife or go back again and bring a wife.
And so,
And then because, remember you were telling me the high incidence of the dangers of childbirth.
Yes,
They had
that's
in
right.
young women
Mm-hmm.
to be able to have children and hopefully deliver a son that would live
Yeah.
past infancy.
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to talk about that? That he married your grandfather
You know, he married a younger
woman.
yes. Mm-hmm.
In San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a number of children.
Yeah. But our families were close. I had 24 first cousins when I was growing up, and we just had a ball. We really did.
And that is because the families all lived in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And about your grandmother, we heard that she ran the family business.
Oh,
Could you
yeah.
describe that?
Well, she took care. She lived with her younger son, and they lived in the same. They lived in the same building, a double two-family story building, with the oldest son was downstairs, and she lived upstairs, and so whenever we went over, we were able to see the whole family together. Mm-hmm.
And your grandmother, she evidently had the business of selling the pig parts.
I guess so. See, I didn't know anything about that stuff. Mm-hmm.
But she was a very strong woman.
Very much so.
You want to talk about her?
Well, that's why my grandfather had to come over for a vacation for a few days at a time, because she was such strong nature.
Was your grandfather's mind strong?
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Nice. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What did he talk about to you?
Oh, he talked about with things, and he enjoyed grandchildren. And my mother had a good-sized house and beautiful garden, because my father loved gardening. And so it was a place for my grandfather to relax. And then a lot of the other parts of the family come and gather and visit while he's there. Mm-hmm.
And so your father actually was very close to his father.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Did he talk about his father ever? Did he ever mention his father worked on the Transcontinental Railroad?
You know, but that was very, very, everyone knew about that. So many of the Chinese went to work on that.
Did your father ever take you on trips to see the railroad?
No.
Not to the Sierras?
Oh, well, when we went on vacation sometimes, but it wasn't deliberately to see the railroad.
But you were aware of...
Oh, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. That was a very dangerous job.
Oh, very much so. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So you said your grandfather was tall and strong.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see him doing other kinds of work? What kind of work did he do after?
I don't know. I had two brothers, Glenn and Robert Jr. And my older brother worked for Shell Oil, and my younger brother was an architect in New York. Mm-hmm.
And your father, could you describe his work?
My father was with the Shell.
And did he go to college?
No. That we did.
Did you have a feeling that your great-grandfather was proud of his work, was proud of being Chinese American?
Oh yeah.
Was he now? Do you know if he was naturalized as a citizen?
I'm not sure.
Have you gone back to, or have you gone to China?
Yes.
Did you go to the ancestral village?
No, I didn't.
And did you speak the Toisan dialect?
No, I don't. I say Samyak is what we spoke at home. And then at home, here in Berkeley, we used to go to, we'd have a teacher come in and teach my brothers and myself Chinese at our house.
What was your education like?
Well, my education, I went to the regular grade schools and then to Berkeley High, and then I went to the university. I graduated in '39. And and then after there was a war, later on when I was married, there was war, and my husband was gone for 3.5 years. And when he came back, then we had a home in Berkeley. So.
Was he with the Army?
No, he was a pharmacist. He graduated from the university, the med school, pharmacy school in UC San Francisco.
And what's his name?
Don Moon Yi, but he was born in Salinas.
And what did you major in? What did you study?
Well, it was English and whatever.
Did you feel that there was a lot of prejudice during this time, with education and looking for a job in the 30s?
Well, I guess there was a lot, but our family was pretty lucky because I guess of what they chose to do and tried to find to do.
And did you feel inspired by the pioneer past?
Well, just that what made a good life for us.
The fact that your grandfather came early.
Yeah. But we had this huge family, with all the cousins, and it was fun. It was wonderful.
Quite a family bond. Did your children ask you about their history?
Sometimes.
Your children are very interested in the history.
Oh, yeah. Especially Wendy.
And have they gone back to China, or have they gone to the village?
No.
The ancestral
Wendy's
I'll
been
maybe
to
go
China.
someday, but I prefer to go to Europe. Better sanitation. It's important to me.
So, Mike, I have a question. When you were at UC Berkeley, is that where you went to school? How many Asian women were there in that school at the time? Many or few or?
Gee, I don't remember how many there were exactly when I was there, but
They were a good number.
they were a good number.
The photos I've seen.
Did your brother, did the rest of your family, did they go to college also?
Oh yeah. My brother went. Both my brothers went to
All
Cal.
your first cousins went.
Yeah, and
Most of
all my
Cal,
first cousins.
Some
Well,
Stanford, Ivy League.
yeah.
But your father didn't go to college, but he had a very good job.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And he must have emphasized education as being.
Oh, very much so. That's what he worked, was to put us through school. 3 kids through school. But he loved to garden, and he had his own hothouse where he grew orchids in our backyard, and in Berkeley.
And did your Did your father grow up in Potrero Hill?
Yeah.
Yeah, and was there a garden then? I mean, working with this, did you do?
Well, I guess so, because it's all open area there. Mm-hmm.
So they all had
Yeah.
they had a green thumb. I know they raised chickens.
Oh,
You
yes.
want to describe that?
In fact, when I was over in the city down there, the kids would have the whole kitchen with all our cousins there. We'd be eating, and then one of them would pipe up and said, "Is this a yakai?" Meaning, was that one of the chickens from their backyard that they were eating? So.
This was outside of Chinatown.
Oh, yeah.
You did not live in Chinatown.
No.
So you had a very
None of us did. And my oldest uncle had a business where he got made up or obtained crews for ships, going to China.
Labor broker.
Yeah, is that what they called?
Labor
Mm-hmm.
broker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was very successful with that. Mm-hmm.
I think he had a storefront office right in China.
Right in Chinatown. I think it was on Sacramento Street. Mm-hmm.
Did your family belong to any district association? You know, like the
My father was a 33rd degree Mason. Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about the Chinatown. You know the
family
you
association.
know.
Yeah, I guess he must have.
This, a lot of the railroad workers were from Toisan, and they were in
Mm-hmm.
the Lee family or the
Yeah.
family. And then they also would have a representative to the Six Company.
Oh, yeah.
So you were aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Do you feel?
Well, my grandmother would wear these two-piece outfits with the wide pants, and then the jackets. They were so beautifully done, but it was the same fabric, heavy black silk. And she had this fair fur cape that she wore over, and that's how she commuted to from where they lived up to the ferry thing, and she came across, and then sometimes if we knew she was coming, we'd run down from Josephine Street down to Hopkins, where the train pulled, and meet her, and it was just so cute to see her like that, and she was very proud, very fussy about her fair cape.
Could you describe her hairdo?
I think she wore it in a knob, but I'm not quite. I couldn't say positively now.
Did she own any jewelry? Did she show you any jewelry that she had?
Well, just what women wore.
I like
I'm sure she had things because,
jade.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And could you describe what your grandfather dressed in?
My grandfather sometimes wore this long Chinese robe, and that's how I can picture him.
What is really important is that you actually remember what your grandfather looked like, and I think it's very important that you said he wore the Chinese robe.
Oh, yeah.
He was tall.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very funny.
Yeah, and we were having a meal, and I thought he was the tutor, so I asked him to join us, and he did. And he wasn't the guy.
Were you a young woman?
Stupid, huh?
Yeah.
Around what time?
She's not that high on common sense.
Was this
No, I'm not.
was this the 1920s?
Oh, no.
Oh,
30s?
long before
30s.
the 30s.
Oh.
Probably in high school or
I see.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
And you,
Old enough to know better.
Yeah.
and you mentioned that your mother was from a pioneer family.
Yeah. Mm.
And that her father was a minister?
Well, he was an educator. He taught Chinese
And then a merchant.
and a merchant. Mm-hmm.
And her grandmother, her maternal grandmother was born here. Because I saw the death certificate.
And what's the maiden name? Your
Wang.
mother's maiden name?
My mother,
Suhu.
Suhu.
And one of them, the eldest daughter, Rose Suhu, married Joseph Shum.
Oh,
who's founder
sure.
of the National Dollar Store.
Mm-hmm. And then we were close families, because
On both
she,
sides.
so because they had 3 children, so, and they lived in Oakland, so we were together a lot. My mother and her sister, and
They were very close.
So there are a lot of stories, a lot of pioneer stories. Did your family ever talk about the effects of the Chinese exclusion law? You know, the fact that the Chinese were not allowed to come after 1882.
I never heard it.
Or they were,
I never heard it.
how about Angel Island?
Oh, Angel Island. My father worked there
Before
at
John
one
Lennon.
time.
Was he an interpreter?
Yeah.
And a photographer.
And he became an expert bridge player commuting on the ferry every morning to Angel Island.
So this is the son of the railroad
yeah,
worker.
yeah,
He's working on Angel Island as an interpreter.
But Angel Island, remember, came into existence long after
Oh, yes,
my
1910.
great-grandfather came.
Yes, but it's part of that same heritage of
Yes.
of Chinese immigration.
Yeah, yes.
Did your father tell you about his experiences?
Oh, sometimes, you know.
So he was an interpreter, but he also took pictures. Would he take pictures for
Yeah.
the service?
He probably did. He's quite a photographer.
Was it photographs of the island or of the people?
I think it was, maybe the whole thing, but at least of the people that I know of.
Do you have any of these photographs, or do you know how?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could find some that are attributed to your father.
We have a lot of family.
A lot of
photographs
family
attributed in the 1890s because I have the negatives. He did his own developing of black and white.
So your father took pictures of his father too.
Yeah. And, you know,
Oh yeah, he has. I have a lot of the negatives.
do we have a picture of the family in our backyard?
Yeah, this was taken by I think my grandfather took this picture.
Yeah.
It's your father.
And this behind is 1327 Joseph
Where
in the backyard. And when he had lawn there was a cellar behind him with stairs down. But I think he told me he set the camera up and then somebody else, because he had to be in the picture.
Yeah.
Somebody else did the whatever. But this was before you were born, so they only had your older brother.
that's Worley
This
and
is 1914.
Worley and
It's
Bobby.
the R. Lim photo. This has my.
And what you did.
I had 3 children, and now I have 3 children and 3 great-grandchildren, and 4 grandchildren. That's right, because that's the newest way. So there's a newest one.
If you, when,
They live in Albany, next to Berkeley.
so when did you get married?
God, when did I get married? June 3rd, 1942. Oh, well. I talk to him every day and tell him everything. Yeah.
And then, and where was your first home? You want to talk about how you?
Yeah, our first home was in San Francisco, right by Ghirardelli Square.
The rental.
Outside of Chinatown.
They never lived in Chinatown.
Never lived in
It's
China.
just that during that time, it was very hard for Chinese to live outside of Chinatown.
There were
Because the
exceptions.
people did not rent to them.
That's true.
That's
There were
true.
exceptions.
So your neighbors were all white.
Yeah. We sort of had what was like in this house, what was the downstairs, and it was converted to a little apartment. And then there was their extra part of their lot was a beautiful garden. And we could just walk to Ghirardelli Square. In fact, we passed it.
It's right next door.
That was
Today.
when it was a chocolate factory.
Yeah. But we passed it just
Well, it's next door.
yeah.
She walked across both bridges.
Oh, yeah. You know, when the bridges were built, she walked across both bridges until they stopped her. She was a very independent woman.
She walked across the bridge for,
As far as they let, it's before they caught her.
for the scenery of it, for the.
Oh, yeah.
recreation.
Oh, something wonderful happening. Mm.
So obviously she didn't have bound feet.
No, oh, no. Oh, well, this piece of jade was my father's stick pin. And so when he passed away, I was given the jade, so I wanted to, I had it made into a ring. And the jeweler, there was a pretty nice jeweler in Berkeley, and I gave it to him to work on. And I was totally surprised that it came out such a contemporary setting, but I've really enjoyed it. Mm. My necklace is it's a natural pearl, and on the chain, and so I just wear it.
It's from, who's it?
Well, my father, my mother, but this is all going to Wendy. Mm.
I'm Wendy Jean Yee. I am the daughter of Jean Lim Yee, who is the daughter of Robert Fook Lim Sr., who was the fourth child and the second son of Lim Lip Hong, our common ancestor who was the first one to come to the Bay Area in California in, I think it was 1859, according to other family members who know that. My father was Don Moon Yee, who was born in Salinas and grew up in Salinas in Monterey County, whose father came in the early 1890s originally as a student, and whose mother came probably after the turn of the 20th century, and she was a Fong from somewhere in the Toisan area of China, southern China, Canton area, and she was literate and a Protestant, and she was considered in the Salinas Chinese community to be an odd duck because she wore hats and was very Western. I never knew her because she went back to visit her family in China in the early 1920s with my father's younger sister, who was a toddler about 2 years old. She left my father with his father, and she never came back. The visit became, I guess, permanent residence. And then she sent his younger sister back when she was 16. And so I have an interesting copy of my aunt's, my father's younger sister's, teenage younger sister's immigration file from the National Archives in San Bruno, because she had to prove that she was the same person as the 2-year-old who was taken out by her mother before she would have even known anything about the Immigration Service and the laws and rules. So the multi-page typed interview that was typed on onion skin paper is quite fascinating because they put these people through the ringer, but luckily she was admitted. And she went on to found what became a very successful retail florist business in Palo Alto right at University Avenue, and became a real estate investor in apartment buildings there, and married into the Young family, which is related to your cohort who's working on this research project, Connie Young Yu. Then on my mother's side, her family was very interesting, not just the Lim Lip Hong side, but also her maternal side, which was Su Hu, because that grandfather came from China, but it's interesting, his wife was born here. But unfortunately, we don't know that much about my maternal great-grandmother, because that was pretty common, because in those days, the culture emphasized everything was about men, the way Muslim cultures are. not really much. Nobody cared that much about the origin of women because women were really second or third class citizens. And many women, what counted was to be the number one wife because many of these men had second families, even Chinese. Because my Yi grandfather had a second wife and a second family after my grandmother went on her visit, which became permanent, to China. And the two must have known about each other because all through the decades, my step-grandmother, even after her husband, my grandfather, died, because he died when my father was only 8. And so his stepmother then had 3 little children, a baby and probably 2 toddlers, and had to go and work in the canneries in Monterey to support them because in those days you just didn't have life insurance to take care of you the way they do in later times, the 20th century. But they always sent some remittance money to the first wife. But I sort of take pride that I was a descendant of the number one wife because that's what counts, really. You're not the descendant of the concubine, but anyway. And then on the Sioux side, my great-grandmother was born here, but I just wish we knew something. We don't really know. And it's very difficult to do research because the National Archives only started keeping track around the 1880s or so. And I guess what's sort of interesting is our family, I would say, was not negatively impacted by the Chinese Exclusion Act because they were already here. So I guess the good news is our common ancestor on the Lim side, Lim Lip Hong, got on a boat and got here and came here and survived his railroad work and then became a merchant eventually. He came long before the Exclusion Act. And they lived on Potrero Hill where apparently they must have gotten on pretty well with the neighbors, but there were a lot of commercial businesses, a lot of polluting type businesses by modern standards because they were ships' chandleries. There were factories that made rope for ships. There were tanneries, poultry and meat slaughterhouses. So when people get all worried about living near pollution, that's nothing because many of these people that grew up, most of the Lim family must have had very strong DNA because many of them survived. For people born in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, they survived well into their 80s and many of them into their 90s. And they were around a lot of pollution. They smoked, they drank. We don't have alcoholics we know of, but they led their life in pretty happy moderation. But I think a lot of the success was they had strong extended family units. They had arguments and fights. There were probably some in-laws that didn't get along with the other sisters and brothers-in-law, but basically they got along. And none of the mothers-in-law that I heard of gave the impression that they were difficult, autocratic dragon ladies. It seemed like they kind of adapted more to American ways. And one thing that's interesting that my mother doesn't know much about, but that one of my first cousins, her older brother's son, Glenn Lim, told me about when we were teenagers, is that in talking to our grandfather, Robert Fook Lim Sr., Bob Lim, apparently he ran away from home, from Potrero Hill, when he was about 14 or 15, and went on the railroads kind of like a hobo, all across the U.S. and ended up in the Deep South. So that's how he developed a funny kind of a prejudice that lasted probably till the day he died against some white people, especially Irish. Because in the South, they would hire him for, I guess, day jobs, and then after he did the work, not pay him. There wasn't much you could do about it. So he had a very very independent American, Yankee type streak. He didn't really behave like the docile Chinese son like his brothers were more likely to be. So he really kind of knew how to kind of maneuver. Just like, because he was completely bilingual and quite, I think, conversant with American culture, that's why he was offered the job by Shell Oil, which was quite a prestigious, big job, because they hired him to handle the Asian farmers in the western U.S., which was basically west of the Rockies, Hawaii, when it was not a state, and Canada and China. He even was sent to China, because I have copies of the immigration file for him, because Chinese who were American-born or naturalized had to, so they could get back in, they really had to register with INS, the smart ones, shrewd ones, before they went on any business or pleasure trip, because to make sure they could get back in. Because the Exclusion Act was not, I guess, recalled formally till let them know you were already American born and could prove it. And they still, kind of ran you through a small ringer coming back. And I also have files on any relative I could find on my mother's maternal side too, who made trips abroad.
I think actually the great grandfather, Lim, did leave the country and did have to go through a.
Now that I don't know, because I didn't find any immigration
so
file
Andrea's
on
got
him.
The file.
Interesting.
Him coming back in and actually going through a pretty rigorous interview process.
Okay, because she didn't tell me about that, because I couldn't find one on him. I saw photos of him and my great grandmother, because they had to certify that their eldest son, who was the labor broker who made trips to China, was in fact their son and born here. They would get affidavits for like the grown children of elderly parents or vice versa. So I have to ask Andrea.
And so you have not been to China?
No. I guess I would like to go. Our family really has nothing to do really with the village. And one problem when you go to China is, and you go to these ancestral villages where we basically don't have anybody, a direct relative that we know of, is that the people who are there think everybody from America is rich, because in relative terms we are, but we're really not by our terms. And then they expect you to give them huge amounts of money, flat screen TVs, refrigerator, and I'm not a wealthy person. So, and I'm not very good at roughing it, so I'm not sure I would be a good person. I'd like to get there before I kick the bucket, but I don't know if it'll happen.
So I think one of the questions we've asked all of the interviewees...
Because I feel culturally much more American.
I agree.
And I have those values. I see nothing really in Chinese political life, and their human rights record is dreadful. Always has been. I mean, I am very thankful, frankly, that my great-grandfather came here so that the rest of us could be born here and grow up culturally American and have the legal system backing us.
That's precisely what
I would not have wanted to be a peasant tilling the soil, in southern China, which probably would have happened, and we probably would have, had a very hard life.
There wasn't enough to eat sometimes.
Yes, because my paternal grandmother died in the mid-40s, despite remittances, because I'm sure the remittances never got to her during the war, because they had to run to escape the communists who were fighting the nationalists, and then the Japanese invading. And they always had poor food distribution in the South, because Beijing and Shanghai didn't care about the peasants. They looked down on them. They were very snobby. And that snobism continues to this day. You meet people who come from China who only can be here because Toisan immigrants from the 19th century laid the groundwork for the positive stereotype of Asian immigration from most of Asia. And they have no interest in American culture. When they move here, they stick to their own. And a lot of them actually look down on Americans, and even white Americans as an aggregate group, which is regrettable because despite the United States warts, we still have the best human rights record and the highest standard of living of any country in the whole world. Why do you think people risk their lives to get here? From the south of the border and from the Orient or wherever, the Middle East now. And some of the negative attitude of some of the more recent Chinese immigrants is most regrettable because it's like they only want America only for what they can get out of it financially, but they aren't willing to put anything in. Some of them don't even want to take the time to learn English better. When some of them have enough money, they don't have to work. They can go to free English language classes that are given at all public schools or adult schools in most cities around the Bay Area, for example. So
Yeah, so what I was saying was that's exactly the...
I'm very proud of being American-born and being an ABC. I have no apologies when Chinese people from the Orient criticize me for not speaking Chinese. I said, well, you know, just watch your kids and your great-grandchildren as generations go by. And we have seven generations now in our family because my older cousins are grandparents.
You were talking about your necklace?
Oh, this beautiful jade pendant, which has an Art Deco platinum and diamond, old cut diamond hook it hangs from, came from my mother's maternal side because one of her eldest sister's husband founded a major American retail chain called the National Dollar Stores, which went out of business about a decade ago, but which had stores all over the western U.S., particularly in California and Hawaii. And at that time, actually, it provided a lot of jobs for Chinese Americans who couldn't get jobs because of racial discrimination in a lot of conventional white American businesses, big and small. And she used to travel, my great aunt Rose, Suhu Shung, used to travel to the Orient and just buy probably relative truckloads of Burmese jade because in the 1920s and 30s, it didn't cost that much. And all the best jadeite jade comes from Burma. So this is a piece that came to my mother's great aunt by marriage, probably as a wedding gift. And so when she passed away and left it to my mom decided to give it to me to enjoy now while she's still alive. Yeah. So I enjoyed it. I wear it for luck. Doesn't always work, but it helps. Can't disprove it.
So I didn't think we talked much about your own life. You know, you grew up there.
I grew up in Berkeley. My parents had to build a house on a lot that a white real estate broker friend of my grandfather's, Robert Lim, helped them get in the North Berkeley Hills. They looked for a lot that would be near the best, highest rated neighborhood public schools, which my sisters and I were able to go to in the 1950s through the late 60s. And, well, we all went to Berkeley High because Berkeley only had one high school, so, because they could never figure out where to put the second one. There were so many debates that they never did. And then the big post-World War II baby boom shrank. And then, you know, they closed some of the schools. And then my mother, to save money, my mother's younger brother, who became a UC Berkeley, Caltech, and Harvard-trained architect, designed the house. It was his first house, so there were a few floor plan issues. And it had spectacular three-bridge view from the North Berkeley Hills. So that's where we grew up. So we grew up in a white neighborhood. But what was most interesting is my mother and her brothers, who were born in her older brother was born in 1913. My mother was born in 1917 at the house on 1327 Josephine Street in North Berkeley in the Foothill Flats. Their younger brother was born in the early Altabates Hospital in 1921 in Berkeley. But they grew up in a white neighborhood. That was very unusual because my grandfather just got along with everybody. And he was able to, I guess, have a positive enough relationship with some white somebody or other. I don't know the exact story. And he got his building lot around 1911 or 12 on that block. And most of the neighbors, they were all white. They were Irish, Scandinavian, German American. And so my mother grew up with all white kids. And I have some darling photographs that my grandfather took of the kids in the early 1920s playing bride and groom on the front of their house. And it's just darling. It's like the kids that were in that Our Gang black and white movies of that era. And you know, one little kid is wearing, you know, the round Corbusier style eyeglasses, and a little blonde girl is the bride, and my uncle, who's Chinese, a cute little boy, was playing the groom. You know, the other kid with the eyeglasses was playing a minister. Very cute. And so that was very unusual. My mother's, Robert Lim and Ruby Sue Lim's family was very unusual because the rest of his siblings grew up among Chinese, like on Potrero Hill. The oldest uncle, who was a labor broker, lived with his mother and father upstairs. The others lived in San Francisco, not in Chinatown. So they too lived in neighborhoods that were more white, but they also had Chinese, like the Richmond district and whatever. There were exceptions, but generally speaking, the Fair Housing Act was not passed until Lyndon Johnson got it railroaded through the U.S. Congress in the mid-'60s. And then fair lending came later. So, but progress is made. But all in all, most Asian immigrants don't even know that there was discrimination. They come here and they pay cash, and they've always been able to buy real estate, but they don't even know the history, and they don't care when you tell them how different it used to be. Because they have this Chinese cultural thing about, oh, have to make money, have to get something for nothing, have to twist somebody's arm. You know?
So
One of the cousin who knew about her older cousin Fanny Lim Lee, who knew about this, our great grandfather's supposed unofficial second family that had a mother or a mistress or a concubine who was Native American Indian. She co-founded a pioneer Chinese sorority, originally at the predecessor of San Francisco State University, which was Teachers College before. And that was one, because the state university system and the University of California system were founded, and the only criteria were you had to have a certain level of grade point average. That is why minorities were able to go. And there were Chinese, whereas if you applied to Stanford, Ivy League, or any private universities, even some of the Catholic ones, they routinely had gentlemen's agreement about how many minorities they would let in. And I spent the first half of my undergraduate years at Wellesley College outside of Boston, and I'm sure there was an unspoken gentlewoman's agreement, because when I went in 1964, I stayed for 2 years, freshman and sophomore years. There were probably only about 24 Asian students, and they were all Chinese. But not that many, about half of us maybe American-born, ABC, and the rest generally from wealthy families in Hong Kong or Taiwan, Singapore. And there was one black student my year. She didn't come back the second year. And no, I wouldn't say anybody was hostile. In fact, most everybody in they were very nice, but I was shocked because they did put me with a Chinese American, an ABC American roommate who grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, whose parents were Cantonese Chinese who grew up in Hawaii but settled in New Haven after her father went to Yale Medical School. He also ended up teaching there and working as an ophthalmologist in New Haven. And it turns out, when we were talking, her grandfather, who'd been dead many, many years, had known my grandfather, Robert F. Lim, Sr., when my grandfather traveled to Hawaii on business for Shell Oil. They knew each other. because she talked to her parents who knew enough from her still then living grandmother, the widow of her grandfather who knew my grandfather. So we thought that was an incredible small world story. Two of us grew up through that. But what we were really shocked about was that they put us with an Asian American roommate. Because I just figured I'd go there because I knew I wasn't going to be one of big numbers. I'd probably have a white roommate, big deal, you know. I'd only grown up with white people in the North Berkeley Hills. And she got so mad, she went and asked one of the deans, and the dean said, well, we just thought you'd be more comfortable. So it shows you how the world has changed since the mid-60s. And they weren't playing discrimination. They just thought, they had certain assumptions that had because they didn't know that our background. She grew up in a wealthy suburb, Hamden, Connecticut, of New Haven.
It's interesting that you were talking about, you know, thinking of yourself as more of an American than anything.
And that's okay. I am not apologetic one bit.
Yeah, but I mean, it's funny that, you know, you can run into circumstances where other people
Right.
will tell you, no, you're not actually like every other American.
Yeah.
Right?
And they didn't, and I knew they didn't mean anything offensive. They just didn't, it's not knowing, it's more ignorance, not in the pejorative sense of ignorance, it's just ignorance because they don't know. And then one of the best stories from my childhood is I was lucky. My father was successful enough as a pharmacist who owned Rexall drugstores when that was the major retail drugstore chain all over America. Before Longs before Longs got huge, before CVS even existed. And they went along and grew around America the way Walgreens did. It's just that Walgreens in later decades knew how to keep on going and keep up with the competition, whereas the Rexall company didn't. So they don't really exist anymore. But my father wanted his kids, his 3 daughters, to see the U.S. So we're the only family we know where my father took about 2 months when I was 10 and a half years old in 1959 and took us on a car trip all around almost every of the 48 states of continental U.S. and most of the provinces of Canada. And I think the only states, his itinerary, he worked together with AAA that we missed were the Dakotas and parts of Florida, because but he fit in just about every major national state park. Now, we didn't appreciate it that much because he also had a big thing about taking photographs and movies when we were tired. But he bought the biggest V8 engine Lincoln Mercury white station wagon with a fake wood that had 3 seats. And because he was partners with his younger half-brother, who was able to watch the business, he was able that 1 year to take about 2 months. So that was quite an experience. And he took movies, and we have a lot of photographs. And then probably about 15 years ago, he had the old reel-to-reel movies. He sent it to some place in Silicon Valley where they transferred it to a cartridge. But I have to get it transferred to DVD because the tape will wear out someday. But one of the best stories was we were in line at Yellowstone Lodge waiting for dinner because you had to line up for this. Probably at that time it was a fairly expensive, huge restaurant. And they had a big fireplace there. They had a hearth that was like the size of this room. And you waited in front there. And this white man who was kind of short came up to my father, who was 5'11" and quite hunky at the time, and said, "Excuse me, sir, do you mind if I ask you a question? Are you Eskimo or Indian?" We nearly cracked up.
Stupid, huh?
No, he didn't know. He said, "I'm from a place," I don't remember where the guy said he was from. "I'm from a place where we don't see any Asian people, so I don't know." So my father explained to him very nicely, because the guy didn't mean anything. He just didn't know. And the guy was smart enough to learn by asking a question. So it sounded dumb to us because in the Bay Area, we were from a multicultural neighborhood, but much of America is not. You're either 90% white and a little bit black, and that's about it. And so he said, my father explained that we were Chinese American, and then the man, he learned something. But that was very funny.